Fort Polk, Louisiana. Summer 2018. What should have been a routine combat training exercise became something else entirely when civilian scientists arrived with equipment designed to detect things the Army doesn't officially acknowledge exist. This is a story about Lieutenant Brian Sutter, the Joint Readiness Training Center, and the things sleeping beneath Sector 7. What started as standard infantry preparation became a cover operation for something that's been waking up for decades. And this is what really happened. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button to support Warborn Shadows and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Lieutenant Brian Sutter. I've served 11 years in the United States Army, with the last 4 assigned as a training officer at the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana. Over the course of my career there, I coordinated 247 separate training operations. Infantry rotations, mechanized combat drills, urban warfare exercises. I know that installation down to the last grid square. All 100,000 acres of it. I can tell routine maintenance from a full-scale emergency without looking at a report. I know the signs when procedures break down. And in June of 2018, nothing was functioning the way it should have been. I'm putting this on record because I'm scheduled to be married in 3 months. My fiancée, Sarah, keeps asking why I requested reassignment to Fort Benning. I've been telling her it was for career advancement. That's a lie. The reality is, I can't remain at Fort Polk any longer. Not after what I witnessed, not after what I learned they're concealing in Sector 7. This statement is my account. If anything happens to me before the wedding, Sarah needs to understand the real reason why. At Fort Polk, the humidity wasn't just uncomfortable. It was oppressive. Louisiana in June meant temperatures pushing 95 degrees by 8 in the morning, with air so dense it felt almost tangible. After enough years stationed there, you stop reacting to it. You hydrate constantly. You rotate undershirts. You adapt. June 14th began like every other scheduled rotation. Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 87th Infantry was slated for a 14-day training cycle. Routine objectives, patrol formations, counter-ambush drills, nighttime maneuvers. I'd overseen the same scenario at least 17 times over the previous year. My responsibility was logistics and oversight, coordinating opposing force movements, verifying blank ammunition counts, and setting timelines for after-action evaluations. Nothing about that morning suggested it would be different. I was in the Tactical Operations Center at 0630, reviewing final logistics with Sergeant Mason Reed. Mason was old Army, 20 years in, face like weathered leather, the kind of NCO who'd seen every possible training fuck-up and prevented most of them. He was drinking his 3rd coffee of the morning, checking equipment manifests on a tablet. "Bravo's got good squad leaders," he said, not looking up. "Won't need much hand-holding. Weather's clear through Saturday. Should be a clean rotation." I nodded, scanning the training area map on the wall. Sectors 1 through 9 laid out in a grid, each one covering roughly 10,000 acres of pine forest, dirt roads, and mock villages. Bravo would operate primarily in Sectors 4, 5, and 6. Sector 7 was reserved for future use, officially listed as under environmental survey for the past 6 months, though I'd never seen any EPA contractors out there. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code was DC. "Lieutenant Sutter," I answered. "This is Colonel Vic, Pentagon Liaison Office." The voice was clipped, professional, utterly devoid of warmth. "You have civilian contractors arriving at your location in approximately 90 minutes. Department of Energy. They'll need full access to training sectors 5, 6, and 7. accommodation for equipment transport and installation. I glanced at Mason, who was watching me now. Sir, we have an active rotation beginning at 1400 hours. Bravo Company's already staging equipment. Your rotation schedule is being modified. Vic interrupted. The contractors take priority. You'll receive revised training parameters within the hour. This comes from Division Command. Are we clear, Lieutenant? Yes, sir. But can I ask what the DOE needs with a combat training area? There was a pause. Brief, but loaded with something I couldn't identify. Environmental monitoring equipment, routine survey work. You'll provide whatever support they request. Vic out. The line went dead. Mason set down his coffee. DOE. That's what the man said. I checked my email, refreshing twice. Nothing yet. Routine survey work. In the middle of a training rotation? Apparently. Mason's jaw tightened. He'd been doing this long enough to know when something didn't add up. Last time I saw DOE badges at Fort Polk was 2012. They shut down a whole training cycle, never told us why. I pulled up the training schedule archive, searching for 2012. June rotation, Delta Company. Exercise status, postponed due to environmental review. Rescheduled August. I frowned. You remember what they were surveying? They didn't say. Set up a bunch of equipment in Sector 7. Had armed escorts, not MPs, something else. Spent a week taking readings, then packed up and left. Exercise resumed like nothing happened. Before I could respond, my email pinged. Revised training parameters, sent from Division G3 Operations. I opened it. Bravo Company's 2-week rotation was now condensed to 5 days. Operational area restricted to Sectors 2, 3, and 4. Sectors 5, 6, and 7 designated as Red Zone. No personnel entry without express authorization. Effective immediately. They're cutting the rotation in half, I said quietly. Mason read over my shoulder. And pushing them away from Sector 7. The contractors arrived at 0823 hours. 3 white SUVs with government plates, followed by 2 cargo trucks. I watched from the TOC window as they pulled up to the equipment depot. The civilians who emerged weren't what I expected. No hard hats or surveying gear. They wore tactical pants and polo shirts, Department of Energy badges clipped to their belts. But what got my attention was the equipment. Large metallic cases, handled with extreme care. Tripods with sensor arrays that looked more astronomical than geological. Laptop stations with satellite uplinks. And something I recognized from my brief stint in a CBRN unit. Radiation detection equipment. Geiger counters, dosimeters, containment suits in waterproof bags. Why does an environmental survey need rad gear? Mason muttered beside me. One of the contractors, a woman in her 40s with close-cropped gray hair, spotted us watching and walked over. Her badge read, Dr. Elizabeth Crane, Senior Field Analyst. You're the training officer? She asked, hand extended. Lieutenant Sutter, this is Sergeant Reed. I shook her hand. Her grip was firm, professional, but her eyes were tired, like she hadn't slept properly in days. Can you tell me what you're surveying? Electromagnetic activity, she said simply. We've detected unusual readings in this area. Standard protocol requires field investigation. That's it. Unusual how? Variations in local EM fields. Could be geological, could be equipment interference. We won't know until we set up the monitoring grid. She glanced past me toward the map on the wall. We'll need vehicle access to Sectors 5, 6, and 7. Perimeter security for our equipment. And I'll need your assurance that no personnel enter those sectors while we're working. The sectors are already restricted, I said. but I'm responsible for safety in this training area. If there's a hazard, there's no immediate danger. Crane interrupted. Too quickly. This is precautionary. We just need a clean environment for accurate readings. Mason crossed his arms. How long will this take? 72 hours for installation. Then we monitor for 10 to 14 days. That's the entire training rotation, I said. I'm aware. Crane's expression didn't change. Your division command has approved the timeline. If you have concerns, take them up with Colonel Vick. She walked away before I could respond, signaling to her team. Within minutes, they were loading equipment onto four-wheelers, preparing to head into the training area. I watched them disappear into the pine forests toward Sector 7 and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not fear exactly. Unease. The kind you get when you realize the mission briefing you received is missing critical information. Bravo Company arrived at 13:15 hours for their modified training brief. Captain Morris, their CO, took the schedule change in stride. You don't make captain without learning to adapt. But I could see confusion in the faces of his squad leaders. They'd been preparing for 2 weeks in one area, now they were getting 5 days in another. Private Noah Kim, one of the new recruits, raised his hand during the briefing. Sir, why is Sector 7 restricted? Environmental survey, I said, repeating the official line. Civilian contractors are doing equipment testing, safety precaution. What kind of environmental hazard exists on a military base? Kim pressed. He had that eager, questioning look of someone fresh out of AIT, still curious enough to ask uncomfortable questions. The kind that requires DOE oversight. Captain Morris cut in, his tone final. Focus on your training objectives, Private. The briefing concluded. Bravo Company moved out to their staging area. I returned to the TOC, pulled up the base's historical records, and started digging. Sector 7 had been partially restricted 6 times in the past 20 years. 1997. Exercise postponed. Environmental review. 2003. Exercise postponed. Geological survey. 2009. Exercise postponed. Equipment malfunction. 2012. Exercise postponed. Environmental review. 2015. Exercise postponed. Maintenance requirement. 2018. Current restriction. Every 5 to 7 years. Always Sector 7. Always civilian contractors, though the agency varied. Sometimes DOE. Sometimes USGS. Once the EPA. Training rotations disrupted, compressed, or relocated. But here's what bothered me. The official after-action reports showed nothing unusual. Exercises completed as scheduled. No mention of restrictions or civilian presence. It was like 2 different records existed. The one I was reading in real time and sanitized versions created later. I called the base archives office, asked for any documentation on the 2012 survey. The clerk put me on hold for 15 minutes, then came back sounding uncertain. Sir, those files are classified. I need special authorization to release them. Classified environmental survey records? That's what the system shows. I thanked her and hung up. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I called a friend from my commissioning class, now working in the Pentagon's G2 intelligence office. Brian, good to hear from you, Major Torres said. What's up? Quick question. You ever hear of DOE running operations at Fort Polk? There was a pause. Why do you ask? They're here now. Electromagnetic survey, they say. But the dang-in history is weird. Classified records, pattern of restrictions. Makes me think it's more than environmental monitoring. Another pause. Longer this time. When Torres spoke again, his voice was careful. "Brian, I'm going to tell you something off the record. If anyone asks, we never had this conversation." "Understood." DOE has a branch most people don't know about. Not just energy policy and nuclear oversight. They handle anomalous phenomena. Things that don't fit standard classification. If they're at Fort Polk, it's not about soil samples. My mouth went dry. "What kind of anomalies?" "The kind that make equipment malfunction, that show up on sensors but can't be explained." "I don't have details. That's way above my clearance. But I know Fort Polk is on a list. Has been since the 80s. Something there produces unusual readings every few years." "Do you know what it is?" "No. But I know people who study it take it seriously. Serious enough to classify everything and maintain cover stories for decades." I heard voices in the background on Torres's end. He spoke quickly. "I have to go. Be careful, Brian. Don't dig too deep. Some holes go places you can't climb back out of." He hung up. That night, I drove out to the edge of Sector 7. It was 21:30 hours, well past dusk. The Louisiana darkness was absolute. No light pollution this deep in the training area, just stars and the distant glow of base facilities. I parked my truck on a service road about half a mile from the Sector 7 boundary, killed the engine, and sat in silence. Through my windshield, I could see lights in the forest. Not flashlights. Steady, positioned lights. The DOE sensor stations. I counted at least 8 clusters, forming a rough perimeter around something I couldn't see. My radio crackled. "TOC to Lieutenant Sutter. What's your position?" I grabbed the handset. "Service Road 7, conducting area familiarization." "Copy that. Be advised, Sector 7 is off limits per division order." "I'm outside the boundary." "Understood. Just confirming you're aware of the restriction." "Roger. Sutter out." I sat there for another 20 minutes, watching the lights. They didn't move, didn't change. Just steady illumination of something in that forest. Then my truck's dashboard started flickering. Battery gauge dropping, radio producing static. My phone screen glitching, apps opening and closing randomly. And I felt it. A pressure in my head, like the air itself was pushing against my skull. Dull throb behind my eyes, metallic taste on my tongue. I started the engine. It turned over rough, sputtering, and backed away from the Sector 7 boundary. The further I drove, the more the symptoms faded. Dashboard stabilized. Headache receded. By the time I was a mile away, everything was normal. I pulled over, hands shaking slightly, and checked my phone. Text message from Sarah. "Miss you. Can't wait for you to be home for good." I stared at that message for a long time. Thought about the wedding in 3 months, the house we were looking at in Georgia, the normal life waiting for me outside Fort Polk. Then I looked back toward Sector 7, at those distant lights in the forest, and thought about Torres's warning. Some holes go places you can't climb back out of. But I was already in the hole. I just didn't know how deep it went yet. That knowledge would come 48 hours later, when the sensors detected something that made Dr. Crane's team evacuate to the TOC. Faces pale with an emotion I'd never seen in professional scientists before. Pure, primal fear. The alarm woke me at 04:47 hours. Not my phone, the base emergency alert system. 3 sharp tones followed by an automated voice. "All personnel maintain current positions. Sector 7 is now code red restricted. Repeat, Sector 7 code red." I was in my quarters, still dressed from the night before. I'd barely slept, kept thinking about the dashboard malfunction, the pressure in my head. I grabbed my radio and truck keys, heading for the T-Oak. The scene there looked like a crisis response. Dr. Crane's entire team had evacuated from Sector 7, their white SUVs parked in a cluster near the command building. Through the window, I could see Crane herself, standing at a laptop station, staring at data scrolling across multiple screens. Her face was sheet white. Mason was already there, coffee forgotten on his desk. "It started at 0430, he said when I walked in. Their sensors went haywire, every station simultaneously. Measuring what? They won't say, but they pulled everyone out of the sector within 15 minutes. No gradual withdrawal, full emergency evacuation. I approached Crane, who didn't look up from her screens. "Dr. Crane, I need to know what's happening." "Electromagnetic anomaly," she said, voice tight. "Magnitude beyond anything we've recorded here." "How far beyond?" She finally looked at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, hands trembling slightly as she typed. 300% increase from baseline. And it's not random fluctuation, it's pulsed, regular intervals, 17 seconds between peaks. "Pulsed," I repeated slowly, "like a signal?" "Like a heartbeat," she said quietly. The word hung in the air between us. Around the toque, other contractors were speaking in urgent, hushed tones. I heard fragments. "Subsurface reading confirms. Can't be geological. Need to contact Raven Rock immediately." "What's Raven Rock?" I asked. Crane's jaw tightened. "That's classified." "Doctor, I'm responsible for safety on this installation. If there's a hazard..." "The hazard is contained," she interrupted. "Sector 7 remains restricted. No personnel entry. We're monitoring the situation." "For how long?" She didn't answer, just returned her attention to the screens. But I saw her hand move to a satellite phone on the desk, fingers hovering over it like she was debating whether to make a call she didn't want to make. By 0800 hours, Bravo Company was asking questions. Captain Morris called me directly. "My squad leaders are reporting equipment malfunctions. Radios cutting out when they patrol near Sector 6. One squad's night vision gear completely failed. What the hell is going on, Sutter?" "Electromagnetic interference from the DOE survey," I said, trying to sound confident. "They're running high-powered equipment. Should normalize once they complete their work." "When will that be?" "They're extending their timeline." "How long?" I hesitated. "Unknown at this time." Morris was silent for a beat. "You're telling me we have an unknown electromagnetic phenomenon affecting combat equipment, and nobody knows when it'll stop?" "That's the situation, sir." "Then I'm pulling my people back to Sector 2. If their gear doesn't work reliably, the training is compromised." He hung up before I could respond. Mason looked up from his terminal. "We need to know what they're really doing here." I agreed. So we went to the base archives. The records room was in an older building near the motor pool, maintained by a civilian clerk who'd been there since the 90s. His name was Albert Fletcher, 60-something, with thick glasses and the patient demeanor of someone who'd filed 10,000 documents and forgotten none of them. "Lieutenant Sutter," he said when we arrived. "Hear about those 2012 files? Among others. You remember that incident?" Fletcher nodded slowly. "I remember a lot of nervous brass. DOE contractors everywhere. Training shut down for 2 weeks. They told us it was environmental monitoring, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" "I processed the after-action paperwork. Official version said everything proceeded normally. But I also processed medical reports for 3 soldiers with severe headaches and nausea. Equipment damage claims for 18 radios and 6 vehicles with electrical failures. And I saw the contractor's equipment when they packed up. What about it? Radiation containment cases, the kind they use for hot materials. Fletcher pulled a worn ledger from a filing cabinet. I'm not supposed to show you this. It's the real inventory log, not the sanitized version. He opened it to June 2012. Listed among the DOE equipment: Geiger-Miller counters, spectrometers, ground-penetrating radar, seismic sensors. But one entry caught my attention: Subsurface Containment Assessment Kit. Containment, Mason said. Not monitoring, containment. Fletcher nodded. Whatever they're studying, they've been trying to contain it for decades. Thump. I spent the rest of the morning searching for soldiers who'd been present during previous incidents. Most had transferred or retired, but I found one name that was still local. Marcus Fowler, former specialist, discharged in 2009. Now working as a contractor at a construction company in Leesville, 15 minutes from base. I called him during lunch. Mr. Fowler, my name is Lieutenant Brian Sutter. I'm investigating an incident at Fort Polk, and I understand you were present during a similar event in 2009. There was a long pause. You calling from base? Yes, sir. Then they're probably listening. Can you meet somewhere else? We agreed on a diner in town, 1800 hours. Marcus Fowler was 41, but looked older. Lean, weathered, with the watchful eyes of someone who'd seen something he couldn't forget. He was already in a corner booth when I arrived, coffee untouched in front of him. I sat down. Thank you for meeting me. What's happening at Sector 7? He asked immediately. Electromagnetic anomaly. DOE contractors evacuated this morning. They're calling it unprecedented. Fowler's expression didn't change. It's not unprecedented. It happened in 2009. Happened in 2003 before that, from what older guys told me. Probably happened before I even enlisted. What exactly happened in 2009? He leaned forward, voice low. We were running night patrol training, standard stuff. But when we got within half a mile of Sector 7, all our equipment started going haywire. Radios, night vision, even our watches. Then the headaches started. 3 guys in my squad dropped to their knees, said it felt like their skulls were being squeezed. How long did it last? About 20 minutes. Then it stopped, sudden as it started. Contractors showed up within an hour, like they were waiting for it. Told us it was equipment malfunction, atmospheric conditions. Bullshit. They sealed off Sector 7 for 2 weeks, set up the same sensor stations you're seeing now. Did you ever find out what caused it? Fowler shook his head. But I saw something the last night before they packed up. I was doing perimeter patrol and I got close to their sensor grid. One of the contractors was on a satellite phone arguing with someone. I heard him say, "The amplitude is increasing. If this trend continues, containment won't be viable past 2020. Containment of what? He didn't say. But then he saw me and terminated the call. Next day, I was reassigned to Fort Hood. Discharge came 6 months later. Medical reasons. They never specified what kind. I felt that cold weight in my stomach again. Do you still experience symptoms? Headaches sometimes, usually when electrical storms roll through. But nothing like that night. He finally sipped his coffee, grimaced at the temperature. You want my advice, Lieutenant? Request a transfer. Whatever's under Sector 7, it's not your problem. Let the DOE handle it. What if it becomes everyone's problem? Fowler met my eyes. Then we're already fucked, and knowing about it won't help. I drove back to base as the sun set. Fowler's words circling in my mind. Containment won't be viable past 2020. We were in 2018, 2 years from whatever threshold they were worried about. When I reached the gate, MPs waved me through with unusual urgency. Something had changed. The TOC was in controlled chaos when I arrived. More contractors had arrived, different agency badges, Department of Defense instead of Energy. Military personnel I didn't recognize, wearing uniforms without unit patches. And in the center of it all, Dr. Crane was on that satellite phone, face grim. Mason pulled me aside. The pulse is accelerating. Started at 17-second intervals this morning. Now it's down to 12 seconds. That's faster. And stronger. The sensor stations closest to the epicenter are overloading. 2 of them completely fried an hour ago. I approached the map table where DoD officials were reviewing data. One of them, a colonel I didn't recognize, glanced at me. "You're the training officer?" "Yes, sir." "Lieutenant Sutter. Colonel Marks, Special Projects Division. I'm assuming temporary command of this situation." He tapped the map over Sector 7. "All training operations are suspended indefinitely. Bravo Company will be relocated to Fort Benning tomorrow morning. You'll coordinate the movement." "Sir, what's causing the pulse?" Marks's expression was stone. "That's classified." "Colonel, You're responsible for following orders, Lieutenant." His tone left no room for debate. "Get Bravo Company off this base by 0900 tomorrow. That's all you need to know." I started to respond, but Crane interrupted. "Colonel, you need to see this." She turned her laptop so we could see the screen. A seismic readout, showing vibrations from deep underground. But the pattern wasn't random. It was rhythmic, regular, 12-second intervals, just like the electromagnetic pulse. "Depth?" Marks asked. 400 meters, Crane said. "Directly beneath Sector 7, and it's moving." The room went very quiet. "Moving how?" I asked. Crane's hands were shaking now. Vertically, rising, approximately 2 meters per hour. Marks grabbed his own satellite phone, stepped away from the group. I heard fragments of his conversation. "Need containment protocols activated." "Yes, I'm aware of the timeline. If it breaches, we'll have no choice." Mason appeared at my elbow. "Brian, look at this." He showed me his tablet. He'd pulled historical seismic data from the USGS database. Fort Polk area, going back to 1985. Every 5 to 7 years, there was a seismic event, always listed as minor tremor, always centered on the same coordinates. The coordinates of Sector 7. And the magnitude was increasing with each event. "It's been waking up," Mason said quietly. "Whatever it is, every few years it gets closer to the surface." "Why hasn't anyone evacuated the base?" "Because officially, there's nothing down there. The seismic events are classified as geological anomalies. The electromagnetic pulses are equipment malfunctions. Every incident gets explained away, records sanitized, and everyone involved gets transferred or discharged." "That's not a containment strategy," I said. "That's a cover-up." "Maybe they're the same thing." At 21:43 hours, the pulse interval dropped to 8 seconds. At 21:56 hours, Private Noah Kim went AWOL. Captain Morris called me personally. Kim left the barracks an hour ago, said he was going to the latrine, never came back. We've searched the immediate area. He's not here. Does he have a vehicle? No. But someone saw him heading toward the training area on foot. I felt my blood go cold. Towards Sector 7. I don't know. But his squad leader said Kim's been obsessing about the restrictions, kept asking questions about what the contractors were doing. You think he'd be stupid enough? Get your people ready to move, I interrupted. I'll find him. I grabbed Mason and 2 MPs, loaded into a truck, and headed towards Sector 7. We found Kim at the Sector 7 boundary line, standing in the middle of the service road, staring into the forest. All around him, the DOE sensor stations were sparking, electrical arcs jumping between equipment. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. And from somewhere deep in the forest came a sound, low, resonant, rhythmic, like something breathing. Kim didn't turn when we approached. He just pointed ahead, into the darkness between the trees. Do you hear it? He asked, voice strange, distant. It's calling. I grabbed his shoulder, tried to pull him back. Private, you're in a restricted area. We need to leave. Now. It's not calling us, Kim continued, as if I hadn't spoken. It's answering. Someone's been calling it for 30 years, and now it's finally waking up. That's when the ground shook, not a tremor. A single, massive impact, like something enormous had just taken a step 400 meters below our feet. And the pulse interval dropped to 4 seconds. My radio crackled with Dr. Crane's voice, barely controlled panic breaking through professional composure. All personnel evacuate Sector 7 immediate vicinity. Repeat, evacuate immediately. Seismic activity indicates imminent. The transmission dissolved into static. Kim smiled, still staring into the forest. It's not a monster, he said softly. It's not an alien. It's us. What we did to ourselves. And it remembers everything. Then he started walking toward Sector 7, toward that rhythmic breathing sound, toward whatever was rising from 4 centuries of earth and stone and military secrets. And I had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether to stop him or follow him into the truth that Fort Polk had been hiding since before I was born. I tackled Kim before he made it 10 feet. We hit the ground hard, dirt and pine needles scraping my face. He struggled, stronger than he should have been, eyes wide and unfocused. Let me go, it needs... Snap out of it, Private! The MPs rushed forward, helped pin him down. Mason was yelling into the radio, getting only static. The ground shook again, harder this time. I heard trees cracking in the forest, sensor stations toppling. That breathing sound was louder now, deep, mechanical, impossibly vast. Kim stopped struggling suddenly, looked at me with clear, terrified eyes. Sir, what did I just do? You walked toward Sector 7. Do you remember why? No. I was in the barracks. Then I was here. His face went pale. It was in my head. I could hear it thinking. Mason grabbed my shoulder. We need to move. Now. We hauled Kim to the truck and floored it away from the boundary. Through the rear window, I watched the forest. The blue glow was spreading, bleeding through the trees like infected veins. And for just a moment, I saw something move in there. Something massive. A shape that was wrong, geometrically impossible. Then we rounded a curve, and it was gone. The TOC had been evacuated to the base command center. When we arrived with Kim, Dr. Crane was waiting with medical personnel and 2 soldiers in full CBRN gear. He went into the zone? Crane asked immediately. Close to the boundary, maybe 30 meters. I watched the medics examine Kim. He said it was in his head. Crane's expression confirmed what I feared. Proximity exposure. The electromagnetic field affects neural activity, causes compulsion, dissociation. Inside the command center, the situation had deteriorated. Colonel Marks was coordinating with people I couldn't identify. The map table showed Sector 7 as a pulsing red zone, expanding slowly. Depth, 380 meters. Pulse interval, 3 seconds. Mason appeared beside me with his tablet. Old personnel file from 1987. Sergeant David Carver gave a statement that got classified immediately. The document was heavily redacted, but fragments remained. Fell through sinkhole during night patrol. Descended approximately 15 meters. Chamber below. Structure not natural. Walls metallic. Rhythmic sound. Rescued after 3 hours. Persistent psychological effects. Medical discharge recommended. There's a structure down there, I said quietly. Something built. Colonel Marks ended his calls and addressed the room. As of 2300 hours, Fort Polk is under emergency containment protocol. All non-essential personnel evacuate by 0600. What's the plan if it breaches? Someone asked. Controlled demolition of Sector 7. We collapse the subsurface chamber, bury whatever's down there under several thousand tons of earth. What alternative? I asked. Marks turned to me, genuine fear in his eyes. What I'm about to tell you is classified top secret. You're hearing it because your cooperation is required. He nodded to Dr. Crane, who pulled up historical documents on the main screen. In 1962, Crane began. The Department of Defense initiated Project Hibernation. The goal was to develop soldiers who could survive extreme conditions. The research was conducted here, at Fort Polk, in a subterranean facility. She clicked through images. Underground laboratories, soldiers in sealed chambers. The project used cryogenic suspension and electromagnetic field manipulation to slow metabolic processes. But there were complications. Neurological changes. The electromagnetic fields affected brain chemistry. Subjects began experiencing shared consciousness. They could feel each other's thoughts. The program director theorized they'd become a collective entity, a hive-mind. My blood went cold. How many subjects? 17 soldiers, all volunteers. All told, they were participating in cold weather endurance training. Crane's voice was hollow. In 1963, the facility's power system failed. Emergency protocols sealed the chamber, but the electromagnetic containment field never shut down. It just kept running. For 60 years, I said slowly. The subjects are still alive down there, still in stasis. But the collective consciousness has been growing stronger. Every few years, it pulses, tries to wake up. We've been containing it, preventing anyone from getting too close. But now it's breaking through. Colonel Marks stepped forward. Those 17 soldiers are still legally active duty. But they're also a biological hazard we don't understand. If they fully wake, if they reach the surface. He shook his head. We can't predict what 60 years of hive-mind evolution has created. You're going to bury them alive, I said. They're already buried. We're just making sure they stay that way. I walked out of the command center. Needed air. Needed to think. Mason found me by the motor pool. You're not going to let them do it. It wasn't a question. 17 men signed up to serve their country, I said quietly. They volunteered for what they thought was endurance training. Instead, they got turned into an experiment. And now the same government that did that wants to seal them in a tomb forever. Brian, you heard what they said. Hive-mind. We don't know what they've become. We don't know because nobody's tried to communicate with them. I looked at Mason. What if they're trying to call for help? What if that pulse is a distress signal? Then we find out, before we bury them. Mason was quiet for a long moment. The original entrance. Sergeant Carver fell into it in 1987. There's a surface access point somewhere in Sector 7. Probably sealed, but if the structure's deteriorating, the seals might be failing too. I nodded. I want to go down there. What about Sarah? Your wedding? I thought about my fiancée, about the normal life waiting. But I thought about something else too. 17 soldiers who trusted their government and got turned into lab rats. I became an officer to protect soldiers, I said, including the ones everyone else forgot about. Mason smiled grimly. Then I guess we're going to need some gear. We left at 0200 hours, when the command center was focused on evacuation. 2 trucks, 4 people. Mason, me, Corporal Hayes, and Specialist Torres. We took full CBRN suits, tactical lights, climbing equipment, and radio boosters. The closer we got to Sector 7, the worse the effects became. Radios produced only static. Truck dashboards flickered. I felt that pressure in my skull again. Hayes vomited twice. Torres's nose started bleeding. But we pushed forward until we found it. A depression in the ground, about 40 feet across, partially collapsed. At the bottom, barely visible through debris, was concrete and a door. That's a blast door, Mason said. Cold War era. Should be sealed. But it wasn't. The door hung open maybe 6 inches, and from the gap came that blue glow, pulsing in 3-second intervals. We activated our suit lights, checked our air supplies, and descended. The facility was exactly what Crane had described. Underground corridors, 1960s institutional architecture, everything covered in decades of dust. Emergency lighting still functioned. Our footsteps echoed. We followed the corridors deeper, past abandoned laboratories and medical bays, until we reached the central chamber. It was vast, maybe 100 feet across, cathedral high. And in the center, 17 cylindrical pods arranged in a circle. Each one contained a soldier in suspended animation. They looked young, early 20s, the age they'd been when the project started. Floating in translucent gel, connected to machines by hundreds of cables. Their eyes were closed, but I could see movement beneath the lids. REM sleep. Dreaming. And around them, the blue electromagnetic field pulsed like a living thing. Mason approached the nearest pod, read the nameplate. Private First Class Marcus Ashton, born 1941, enlisted 1960. I checked another. Specialist James Riley, born 1942. 17 names, 17 faces, 17 young men who'd been 20 years old when they went to sleep and hadn't aged a day since. Look at the central console, Torres said. In the middle of the circle was a control station, still active. Screens showed vital signs, all 17 soldiers alive, stable. And beneath that, a message typed on a screen in block letters. Please. We are still here. We are still us. Please do not leave us again. My throat tightened. They're conscious. They've been conscious this whole time. The pulse suddenly accelerated. The blue light intensified, and I felt something in my head. Not words exactly, but emotion. Desperation. Fear. Hope. They knew we were here. We need to wake them, I said. Mason grabbed my arm. Brian, we don't know. They're asking for help. Look at the message. They're not a weapon. They're prisoners. I approached the control console, studied the interface. 1960s technology. But the logic was clear. Revival protocol. Emergency release. If I do this, I said, everything changes. The cover-up fails. The truth comes out. I looked at the 17 sleeping faces, thought about what they'd sacrificed, what had been taken from them. Or we give 17 soldiers a chance to come home. I pressed the activation sequence. The pods opened with hydraulic hisses. The soldiers emerged slowly, stumbling, catching each other as they learned to stand. The gel drained away, leaving them gasping, coughing, alive. They looked around the chamber with eyes that had last seen sunlight in 1963. One of them, Sergeant Thomas Wade, focused on me, spoke with a voice rough from disuse. "What year?" 2018, I said. June. Wade's face crumpled. 55 years. The others were coming to the same realization. Some collapsed, sobbing, others just stared. But they stayed connected. I could see it in the way they moved together, supported each other. The hive-mind was real, but it wasn't monstrous. It was 17 men who'd learned to survive by becoming one. "You came for us," Wade said. "We called. For years we called, but nobody answered." "I answered," I said, "and I'm getting you out." The evacuation was chaos. We got the 17 soldiers topside just as DOD teams arrived. Colonel Marks's face when he saw the awakened soldiers was something I'll never forget. Shock, anger, fear, and underneath it all, something that might have been relief. The controlled demolition was canceled. The soldiers were taken to Walter Reed Medical Center. Dr. Crane tried to classify the whole incident, but I'd already uploaded video footage to 3 different secure servers with instructions to release it if I disappeared. The story broke anyway. Congressional hearings were scheduled. The Army launched an internal review, and I requested that transfer to Fort Benning. I'm writing this from Georgia, 2 weeks before my wedding. The 17 soldiers are still at Walter Reed. Medical evaluation shows they're healthy, impossibly so. The hive-mind effect is permanent but manageable. They're relearning how to be individuals while staying connected. Sergeant Wade writes to me sometimes. Says they're getting therapy, learning about the world they woke up to. Some have living family members. Others have nobody left. The Army is providing them with full back pay, benefits, and support. It's not justice. Nothing could be justice for what was done to them. But it's acknowledgement. It's truth. Sarah asked me once why I risked everything for 17 strangers. I told her, I became an officer to protect soldiers. All soldiers. Even the ones buried beneath training grounds, forgotten by everyone except the men who experimented on them. If you've ever been to Fort Polk, Louisiana, maybe you've felt it. That electromagnetic hum in Sector 7. That sense of something massive sleeping beneath your feet. Project Hibernation isn't the monster. The real monsters are the officials who turned 17 volunteers into lab rats, then buried the evidence for 60 years. The 17 aren't monsters. They're soldiers who survived the impossible, who stayed human despite everything, who held on to hope for 60 years that someone would hear their call. Hit that subscribe button, share this story, because there are more Project Hibernations out there, more buried experiments, more forgotten soldiers. Sergeant Thomas Wade and his brothers are free now, still connected, still healing, still learning what it means to be human in a world that left them behind. Share this story. Keep their names alive. Because the truth is worth more than any cover-up, and some debts can never be repaid. But they can be acknowledged. That's all they ever wanted. To be remembered, to be human, to come home.